So today here in Manali, and at the Ngari Monastery, which has been established here. Initially, the monastery was offered to the three centers of seats of learning, but because the former abbot of Gomang Monastery, who is now the abbot of the monastery here, expressed a wish to have his monastery re-established here in India, and because this monastery was already available, it was given to him. And the monastery is not only focused on memorizing prayers and rituals, but studying classic texts. The three monasteries, Ngari, Thakpo, and this Ngari and Thakpo monastery, and then Chogorgyal were established. And from Ngari area, some monks were gathered in Wen, and therefore the third Dalai Lama established the Wen Ngari monastery in Tibet. And during the 3-month retreat, rainy season retreat, in Chogorgyal, the other monastery, the third Dalai Lama found that all three monasteries gathered for the 3-month rainy season retreat. And in Chogorgyal, they do not have study of classic texts, but they are involved more in tantric rituals, like Namgyal Monastery in the past, whereas Ngari, the Ngari and Dakpo monasteries, Dakpo Sheduling monasteries, were engaged in the study of classic texts. I've been to Dakpo Monastery, which is re-established here nearby Patlikul in Case. And this time I'm very happy to be here at the Ngari Monastery.
In Kulu, Manali, Tagasanele, Chi Nangchul Tonayonge, me Kangsam Yori, me Puri Kangsam Yori, and then a Karsha Kunu. Tesu Chaneta, Yuba Manche, Napochati Yori. So, any name you. 차진시 디세디기 산제 비출 대바 차다 맞아 사야지 소수 감도 매발 참도 마성토네 삼당 거래 제마도 네디 점물이 되가라 아니 출루 매겐조를 최초거래 쓰기면 제 최근 안에 남과 최고래 남과 약수를 쓰기면 나나 내버지글이야.
So in the Kulu Manali, Kulu Valley places, you have to bring where? We don't have. And so many people are followers of Buddhism, and with regard to Buddhism, it's not merely focused on, it's not practiced merely based on faith, but reasoning is used. But I never say Buddhism is the best religion, because it's like a medicine which needs to be prescribed according to the condition of the patient and patient's health, body, and so forth. And so accordingly, and similarly, the religious traditions are meant for those with different mental dispositions. offering being presented by the chief monk of the monastery, Nari Monastery. This crown anointed by scented water, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, and the sun and the moon. I imagine it as Buddha filled and offer it to you. May all beings enjoy the pure land. Tam Guru Ratna Mandal Kam Yatayami. So today, we are gathered here for Dharma discourse on spirituality, and therefore, from the side of the teacher, there must be a very pure and right motivation to give teaching, and on the audience part also, you should have the pure and correct motivation to listen to the teaching. Without this correct motivation, even the Dharma discourse, spiritual discourse on spirituality, could turn into causes for sin, such as from the part of the Lama, wishing for gains, offerings, fame, and so forth. And so with these motivations, then the teaching could into non-virtuous practice. And then on the part of the disciples, if you come to the have come to the teaching in order to be able to count how many times you have received the teachings, or for some kind of a fame and name, that's wrong. And therefore, on the part of the teacher, whether it's on the part of the teacher or the disciples, the listeners, what has to happen is that the Dharma discourse must become a Dharma practice. And therefore, if you could listen to the teaching with correct taking refuge, way of taking refuge in the three jewels, then this teaching discourse will turn into, actually become a Dharma spiritual discourse. And then on top of that, if you listen moreover with that of Bodhichitta motivation, as we usually say the prayer, may I take refuge in the three jewels until I become enlightened. And also, as Shantideva says in Bodhisattva Charyavatara, as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain to dispel the misery of the transmigrators. And therefore, with the motivation to be able to help others, and temporarily as well as in the long term, so that I may be able to fulfill the desires and wishes of all sentient beings according to their wishes. So with this motivation, let us say the verse of taking refuge in Bodhicitta 3 times. Please say this prayer together. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until I become enlightened. The practice of generosity and so forth that I have done, may they lead me to Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. So this is said 3 times. I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I become enlightened through the practices of generosity and so forth. May I become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings.
다 꿀로 내 인신하라 대저기
So Kulu is one of the 24 sacred places of Heruka deity or Samvara deity. And so, in other words, there are many gods and non-gods and so forth, which who reside in this region. So that's why this prayer to call on everyone, humans, gods, and asuras and so forth, to listen to the teaching, to come and listen to the teaching, is recited. So in the languages of the humans and gods, asuras and so forth, I give this teaching. So in Buddhism, we talk about all mother sentient beings across the expanse of space. So this expression is used, and therefore all sentient beings, whoever they may be, are equal in not wanting suffering but wanting happiness. Even the animals, insects and so forth, and particularly all living beings, sentient beings on this earth, have that wish to have happiness and not suffering. And amongst these many different sentient beings, there are 7 billion people on this earth. Everyone wants happiness and do not want suffering. So spirituality or religion is something that is related to human society. Other animals do not have the same brain like human beings, and therefore they do not have much deeper thinking as such. They use their 5 senses alone, mostly. And so this human brain, with this human brain we are able to think deeply. And therefore religions developed amongst human beings. And so amongst the humanity, we can have 3 categories of people. People who are believers and non-believers and then atheists. So those who have not much interest in religion, when they face challenges and becomes very unhappy, they become really overwhelmed by those challenges and problems. Whereas people who follow some religion, at least in the case of atheists, for example, they can still keep their hope, thinking of Allah or God or whichever they call them. They have someone or something to seek refuge in and keep their hope alive. So for the last over 3,000 years in this world, maybe the oldest religious tradition developed in India, the term Dharma came into use. And also the practice of non-violence has been there for over 3,000 years in India. And when you talk about ahimsa, non-violence, not harming, then naturally the talk of compassion comes along. And so these practices have been there in India for the last 3,000 years. And then there has also been the practice of single-pointed concentration and also critical analytical thinking, shamatha and vipassana in India. Amongst the many different philosophical and religious traditions, the training of mind, this practice of training of mind has developed in India. The Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, also practiced love, compassion, and shamatha, the single-pointed concentration, and vipassana in India, which had developed in India even before him. And so he practiced them. And then in the Middle East, Islam, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, and Judaism, they developed in the Middle East, in the world. And so those who are believers have something to keep their hope in. So there is this kind of advantage as well for them. So amongst these different religious traditions, of course, all of them are helpful and to human beings. When the followers of these different religions face problems, I mean, they can draw some kind of a consolation from these various religions. And then there is also a system of critical analysis and examination, investigation into the nature of things, like, for example, science, modern science. And so when this developed further, this critical investigation into the nature of things developed further, some of the religions also face some problem. So since religious belief developed in connection with the human brain, human mind. So one of the main features of the human mind is that of doing critical analysis and investigation into things. So amongst the different religious traditions, Buddhism is the one religion that mainly is based on critical analysis, reasoning. Buddha himself has said, "O monks and scholars, just as gold is tested by burning, cutting, and rubbing, likewise you should examine my teaching and then accept it, not because you have faith in me." And so the Buddha was saying that his followers, the monks and so forth, should not keep faith in his teaching because he has said so, but they must do critical analysis and investigation into the teaching. And then when they see the reason through this kind of investigation, then they should have faith in the teaching. So this is something very significant. And so the Nalanda masters, the masters of Nalanda monastic institution, also by using reason and logic, have categorized the teaching of the Buddha into those of interpretable teachings and definitive teachings. Whether they can be, the words of the Buddha can be taken literally or not. They have made this kind of critical discrimination within the teaching of the Buddha by doing critical analysis. So in accordance with the disposition, mental dispositions, interests, and so forth of a certain disciples, the Buddha gave certain teachings. But if they were taken literally, they would be countered by reason, and therefore they are counted as interpretable teachings by saying that this teaching was given with certain purpose in mind to help those disciples who needed such teachings, and if it was taken literally, then it is countered by or undermined by reason. So for the Madhyamikas, those teachings which teach the ultimate truth explicitly, and they are considered as they are the ultimate truth are considered as ultimate or definitive teachings, whereas those teachings which do not teach the ultimate truth are considered interpretable teachings. And therefore, in the Nalanda monastic tradition, the use of critical analysis into the teaching is considered very important. So, regarding the Buddha, first he left his royal life and became homeless by seeing the sufferings of birth, aging, sickness, and death. And then he left his royal family, royal life, and went through the 6-year practice of austerity. And then after that, he became enlightened. So after becoming enlightened, the Buddha said, I have found this nature-like dharma, which is profound, peaceful, profound, without fabrication, and luminous. Even if I were to teach to others, no one will understand me, and therefore I'll remain silent in the forest. What he meant by these last two lines is the profundity of the teaching, and so forth, that nobody would understand, and is that the teaching or understanding and insight into selflessness. So, because in those days, when the Buddha appeared in the world, the religious traditions of India were mostly believers in Creator God and also an independent self of a being. So there had been philosophical traditions like Sankhya, Vaisheshikas, and Vedanta, Jainism, and so forth. So all of them, these different traditions of India that existed before the Buddha came, believed in an independent self, Atma. And then the Buddha, having gone through the process of study, reflection, and meditation, has actually found it to be the case that if he were to teach this insight into the selflessness, nobody will be able to understand him. But then, gradually, gods like Brahma, Indra, and so forth came to him and requested to give teachings. And then the Buddha gave teaching to the first 5 disciples of the Buddha, Godinaya and so forth. And they also requested him, the Buddha, to give teachings according to what he has discovered in his experience. And therefore, he gave the first sermon on the 4 truths for the Arya beings, which is normally called the 4 Noble Truths. And therefore, in order to understand the teaching on the 4 Noble Truths, Master Nagarjuna has said that someone who understands dependent origination of things would be able to actually gain insight into these 4 Noble Truths, which are the truth of suffering, true suffering, true origin, true cessation, and true path. And then, with regard to the selflessness that the Buddha has taught, even during the first sermon, he elaborated on it. In the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. And so, with regard to true cessation, the Buddha elaborated on it in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. by understanding that there is suffering and its origin, that there is a possibility to overcome the origin and the suffering, thereby attaining that of true cessation. And then with regard to the Four Noble Truths and the 16 aspects, there are shared teachings with those of the Theravada tradition today, which I extend. And then with regard to the teaching on the perfection of wisdom sutras, which was taught in Gritakuti, the vulture mount, the Buddha gave this teaching to beings who have more pure karma, more purified karma. And there is a short teaching of the perfection of wisdom, which is called the perfection of wisdom in 25 verses. And so the first sermon and the second sermon being the perfection of wisdom teachings, if you actually compare these two together, then you'll see the profundity and the specialty of the teaching of the Buddha. And then in Vaishali and other places, the Buddha gave the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, such as the teachings on the Sandinimochana Sutra. And then also there is an aspect of the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, which teaches that of the Buddha nature. And the Tathagata Garbha Sutra is the teaching or the sutra which teaches this Tathagata Garbha or the Buddha nature. And this sutra, the Tathagata Garbha Sutra, becomes the source teaching of the Mahayana Uttara Tantra by Maitreya. And so in this third teaching, the subject of clear light or luminous mind is the subject matter, whereas the object luminosity or object clear light, which is emptiness, refers to object clear light refers to this emptiness. So I feel that the Buddha, in his second turning of the wheel of Dharma, he taught what he referred in the beginning, before he started giving teachings to others, where he said, this profound Dharma I have found, which is peaceful, profound, and so forth. Is a reference to the profundity, and the peacefulness refers to the perfection of wisdom teachings. And then with regard to the luminosity, it refers to the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. And particularly when you go into Tantra, there of the clear light mind that is taught in the Tantra, using which there is the attainment of the what is known as the union of the two, the clear light and the illusory body. So with regard to the Sanskrit tradition, it emphasizes investigation into the nature of things. As Nagarjuna has said, the Buddhas gave teaching based on the two truths. So understanding the difference between the two truths, one should understand the teaching of the Buddha. So with regard to the practices of taking refuge and keeping faith, these are conventional practices, whereas the true cessation has to be understood by understanding that the afflictive emotions and defilements are temporary adventures because they are based on or rooted in ignorance, as the 400 verses said, just as the physical faculty permeates all other faculties, sense faculties, likewise the confusion or ignorance permeates all other destructive emotions, and therefore one has to first gain understanding into the nature of things. By understanding dependent origination. So when you understand ignorance is something distorted view, a distorted view which doesn't accord with reality, and because it's a misconception, one should understand that there's always an opposing factor to counter it. And therefore, understanding that the afflictive emotions and disturbing conceptions are temporary, whereas the true nature of mind is luminous, clear light, and in its intrinsic nature is not affected by that of the afflictions. So this is taught in the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, and particularly in the highest Yoga Tantra, such as Guhya Samaja Tantra, where it mentions that because of the 80 different conceptions, there is the destructive emotions arising. For example, the three phases of appearance, whitish appearance, reddish increase, and then blackish near attainment. After stopping these three conceptions, or three phases, the 80 different conceptions cease, and then your clear light mind becomes manifest. And therefore, understanding that the afflictive emotions can be overcome through wisdom, which counters it, and one can actually see that the possibility of nirvana. Even in the non-Buddhist traditions of India, talk about the two truths. But understanding the two truths precisely, one needs to understand the teaching of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. In the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, for example, in the Heart Sutra, it says, form is empty, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, and emptiness too is not other than form. So what this means is that although things do exist, but when you actually search for their identity within them, you cannot find anything that you can pinpoint as being this or that. And therefore, things have things are designated, whereas the Chittamatras say that when things cannot be found, and when you search for their identity, instead of saying that things have no independent existence, but merely that they are merely designated, what they say is things do not exist externally. So just as physical things cannot be found when you search for their identity, likewise the mind also cannot be found. Although the mind does not have any physical extension as such, but it has its own temporal sequence. So there's no special extension, but temporal extension within the mind. But still, it cannot be found when you search for its identity, although it's made of a sequence of moments of consciousness. And so, just like the external things, physical matter cannot be found when you search for the identity, likewise, the mind cannot be found when you search for its identity. And whereas this is the case, what happens to us is that things do appear to have some kind of objective, independent existence. And also the experience within also seems to have some kind of independent existence, whereas in quantum physics they talk about nothing existing objectively. And so this is similar to the understanding in Buddhism that things have no objective independent existence. So I use the understanding of quantum physics in my meditation on emptiness. So, of course, quantum physics is so far is mostly focused on the external matter, and they say that things exist as long as there is an observer, there is observed object. So the Chittamatras say that things do not, since things cannot be found when you search for their identity, that things do not have any external existence. Whereas the Madhyamakas who reject any substantiality in things, so in the Madhyamaka Avatara, for example, Master Chandrakirti actually proves that things do not have any objective independent existence. So whereas the slightly different version of the Madhyamaka, according to the Savatantrika Madhyamakas, they say that things have some objective existence, but in the ultimate sense, they do not exist objectively. So they have to qualify their assertion with this term, ultimate. So the Madhyamakas, rejecting any substantiality, say that things do not exist objectively at all, but because they affect us, the external things and our experiences affect us, we cannot deny their existence. And therefore, though they cannot be found to exist, when you do the sevenfold investigation into their nature, like investigating into a chariot through the sevenfold reasoning, yet they exist by way of convention and designation. And so Master Nagarjuna also says that things, apart from being designated, nothing really exists objectively, independently. And so when you think along these lines, they really inspire you, give experience into the nature of things. So form is empty means that form or physicality of things cannot be found when you search for its identity, but they exist merely by way of designation. Although they do appear to have some objective existence, they do not exist that way. And then emptiness is form means that things, it doesn't mean that things do not exist, but because they are designated and therefore they are empty from their own side, yet they do exist by way of relationship, a connection, and therefore things, emptiness is form. They do not exist the way they appear to us, in the way they appear to us, but because they are dependent on others, they do exist by way of dependence, relation, and therefore they are empty, and emptiness is form. So by understanding that things do not have any independent existence, but that they are relative, exist by way of designation, you'll be able to see that the mind's true nature is empty and also luminous. And through this understanding that mind's true nature, in its intrinsic nature, is that of luminosity, therefore the defilements are not permanent, that they are adventitious, and therefore you can see the possibility of overcoming these defilements and making this clear light mind, nature of the mind, manifest. And therefore, based on these teachings, you can understand the profundity or the specialty of the teaching of the Buddha. So I usually say, so in the Pali tradition, they do have the process of study, reflection and meditation, but they mainly are based on scriptural quotations, although they do have meditation on impermanence, suffering, and then some rough understanding of selflessness as well, but they mainly are base themselves on scriptural quotation, on the authority of scriptures. So without using the reason, then the Sanskrit tradition, it's like trying to crack a hard object to eat without teeth. Whereas if you have the Sanskrit tradition, it's like you are having your teeth to crack something hard when you eat it. So the Nalanda monastic university tradition, which uses reason, the main person or the master who started this tradition was Master Nagarjuna, using reasoning. And he taught the Mula Madhyamaka Karika and also that of the Ratnavali, the precious garland. And the first chapter teaches on emptiness and so forth, and then the rest of the chapters teaches on other practices. And in the Mula Madhyamaka, the fundamental verses of wisdom, fundamental wisdom verses of the middle way, right in the beginning, Master Nagarjuna salutes the Buddha for teaching dependent origination. And at the end of the text, he pays homage to the Buddha in gratitude for teaching the dependent origination and emptiness, where he says, I pay homage to the Gautama who, moved by his compassion toward the profound, the sacred Dharma, to rid us of all distorted views. And then Buddha Palita also emphasizes these teachings, how things are designated, not only focused on the empty nature of things, which is the emphasis made in Nagarjuna's text, the fundamental wisdom verses of the middle way, and then Master Chandrakirti, who was a later proponent of the teaching of the Buddha tradition of the Master Nagarjuna, wrote the Prasana Pada, or clear words, which is word for word and commentary of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and then he wrote Madhyamaka Avatara, which is a commentary, a meaning commentary of the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. And therefore, the Nalanda tradition is something which shows its profundity through the use of logic and reasoning. And so this teaching is actually compatible with that of the quantum physics. So there's no other religious tradition or where you have these teachings based on reason and not only resorting to scriptural authority. And therefore, we have Dignagas, Pramana Samuchaya, and so forth, and also Dharmakirti, Master Dharmakirti's Pramana Vartika, and others, which use reason to demonstrate the truth of the teaching of the Buddha. And the second chapter of Dharmakirti is Pramana Vartika, Karika, the commentary on the valid cognition proves the Buddha to be an authority or a reliable person through reasoning, which is very profound, how he proves the Buddha to be omniscient. And so, since we have this tradition of establishing or demonstrating the teaching of the Buddha, the truth of the teaching of the Buddha through reason, today, even today, since we have this tradition, the Nalanda tradition, when we have also people who face difficulty with other religious traditions which do not use reason, this tradition is still extant. Of course, all religious traditions teach love, compassion, tolerance, forgiveness, and so forth. So even animals appreciate love and compassion. And so all religious traditions, the teachers, or the founding teachers of all religious traditions considered this very important, love and compassion, and therefore gave their teachings. So loving kindness or compassion and love is taught by all religious traditions. Now, with regard to cultivation of it, all theistic religious traditions which believe in a creator God, such as Sankhya school, believing or asserting a creator God, also use the creator God as the reason for the practice of love and compassion. All of them say that, for example, Christianity says that all creatures are, all beings like us are son or children of the same God. And therefore, because we have the same Father, we are like brothers and sisters, and therefore there's need for us to practice love and compassion. So Christianity believing in God, or Jesus Christ, and Islam believing in Allah or Muhammad, when they think deeply that everyone is creation of God, and there's no way they can think of actually harming another person or being. So when these teachings are not understood for transforming one's mind, well, then the religions are used for actually negative purposes, like killing others, which is very unfortunate, very sad. So it may be possible for those who are atheists, who are against religion, to do this kind of thing, but those who believe in a religion doing this kind of thing is very unfortunate, very sad. So, on the basis of understanding that all religions teach the same, have the same message of love and compassion, there is every reason for us to work for harmony amongst religious traditions. These religious traditions are needed because people have different mental dispositions. Just as within Buddhism, we have the philosophical schools which have different assertions regarding the nature nature of things, such as Vaibhashikas, Sotantikas, Chittamatras, and Madhyamakas, because of using having different mental dispositions, interest, and inclination, and their character or nature, we need these different philosophical traditions. So, all religious traditions have the same message of love, compassion, taking care of each other, tolerance, and so forth. So perhaps I should stop here for today. So if you turn to page 107 in this text that you have been given, there is a commentary on awakening mind, and then page 131, on page 31, we have the 8 verses of training the mind, and then on 133 down, the 37 practices of Bodhisattvas. So if you could read these 3 books today, before coming to teaching tomorrow, it would be very helpful. And the text by Master Nagarjuna, which is a commentary on the awakening mind, is quite tough text. So it teaches both the types of bodhicitta, as it's called, the ultimate and the conventional bodhicitta. And it is a commentary on a verse that comes in the beginning of the text, which comes from the root tantra, Guya Samaja root tantra, Hyacinth. And then in the Tibetan, there is also a text in prose form, the same with the same title. So if you are able to read Tibetan, read that too. It's not very difficult to understand. And so for today, I'll stop here. It has been a general introduction to the teaching of the Buddha, a general kind of a presentation of the teaching of the Buddha. And having understood the teaching of the Buddha based on this kind of introductory teaching, then when it comes to practice the Dharma, you have the practice of Bodhichitta, this altruistic intention to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And then as a support for that practice, you have that of the understanding of emptiness, which will come in the text tomorrow. So we become unhappy because of our selfish attitude, and together with it, there is this strong grasping at some kind of independent objective existence and things and self. And so because of these two, we are disturbed, our minds is disturbed, and therefore to counter these two, we have that of cherishing others over oneself, because when you remain selfish, totally indulging in one's own well-being, then you become really unhappy. And then to counter this, there is teaching in the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, a guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, and which uses a lot of reasonings to counter our selfish, self-cherishing attitude. So because of our selfish attitude, we become really unhappy, and there's fear and so forth. Whereas, and that is because the whole world becomes your enemy, and then you have fear and so forth. Whereas if you are able to see the whole world as your friend, then there will not be such fear. And so, by following the process of the threefold process of listening to the teaching or studying it, And then doing reflection and then meditation, what happens is the first one will actually reduce your fear a little, and then the second phase will actually help it further to reduce your fear and so forth. And then the meditation will actually lead you through to tread the path, the five-tiered path, which is referred by the mantra in Heart Sutra, Gade Gade Paragade Parasangade Bodhi Swaha. And so you have some experience of Bodhichitta in the beginning, referred by the first Gade, and then the second Gade refers to the path of application, or where you have the experience of insight into emptiness through the combination of single-pointed concentration and vipassana, and then through the meditative process, and then you have the direct insight into emptiness when you reach the path of seeing, and you further acquaint with it through the path of meditation, and then finally you reach that of Buddhahood. So this is a verse dedication. Singwanki seje gewe chengar kanjin shin yongson gachen melam kanze be tresan ting de nyodo chawa su nando chungi samet chosum tuje tu da tenzik top le de lo me den du da ja ki tembe melam geng me nyon ro sho.